what does entail into clinical trial when we are looking at the safety?
COVID has really posed a very big threat, a lot of issues, but certainly health issues.
What is the best way to find out if there is something is available for them? Can they ask?
Or diabetes, or whichever way you want. And the study will the
COVID vaccine clinical trial. And the floor is yours.
Code is being passed on for our body to for the protein to be made by the genetic code in our body, in our cells, and then for our cells to recognize.
TVAsia Telugu channel. In every episode of Healthline, we bring you an established specialist, a physician, who has a lot of information to share with you. This information is for you so that you can use it to improve your own quality of life. Healthcare is a field which is under innovation every day. Advanced technologies, new medications, new technologies, new clinical trials. And it's really hard to keep up with new knowledge. And that's why it's really important that we have someone here talking to you about current trends, latest happening, and something that is really essential for you to know and how to take care of your health. It's my great pleasure. Today, we have Dr. Swati Sathe in this room, having a one-to-one conversation on Healthline. Dr. Swati Sathe is a neurologist. She earned her degree in internal medicine from Bombay University. Then she further did her fellowship in New York University. Her specialty is neurology as well as metabolic disorder. But the topic that is close to her heart is about rare diseases. She is really strong supportive of rare diseases and create awareness in the community, which is general community as well as medical community. She talks about rare diseases because she is the expert. She also treats rare diseases as an internal medicine practitioner. And she also is an adjunct professor at Rutgers New Jersey Medical School. So it's my great honor and privilege to invite Dr. Swati Sathe to Healthline. Welcome, Dr. Sathe.
Thank you, Varsha. Thank you for that kind introduction.
It's such a great pleasure to have you here at this forum, Healthline. And today's topic is such an innovative topic that you have suggested and you wanted to talk about. It's about clinical trials. This is one topic that is not really talked about, not in front of community members. I know that we discuss a lot with medical students, our physicians, and we talk about clinical trials at conferences. So bringing you at this forum, this is really going to be a topic that community can learn about. So naturally, my first question would be, what is clinical trial?
So Varsha, I thought that this topic would be very useful given that we are in the COVID pandemic and there are so many trials going on for the COVID vaccine. And I'm sure people have questions about what a trial actually means. Why does it take so much time to get a vaccine out to the people and so on. So that was the reason for choosing this topic. A clinical trial essentially is a process by which a medication or a drug or a device or a biologic, whatever the therapeutic substance or device may be, can be utilized in patients or people. So how does it go from conception that this is something that can be used for a disease in humans? How does it go from that point to actually being available to people who suffer from that disease? So that whole process is the process of clinical trial.
Okay, so what I understand that before a medication comes into the market, and actually when a physician will prescribe this medication to patients, or even a device such as an inhaler, or it can be an oxygen distributor, anything that comes in the market, it has to go through rigorous testing, correct? Like when
Yeah.
we say quality analysis or testing it out. So clinical trial is the terminology for that.
It's a term.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Sathe. So can you explain and elaborate further about why it is so important now amidst COVID? Why do we really need to understand the clinical trial?
COVID has really posed a very big threat to a lot of issues, but certainly health issues and hospital admissions and healthcare resources. Financial, I won't even talk about because that is really not the subject of today's topic. And everybody's waiting for a cure or a vaccine. And I think most people understand that for an infectious disease like COVID, a vaccine may be a long-term answer. We have seen great successes. I mean, one of the biggest success stories of the last century were actually the vaccines, which essentially took care of smallpox. They took care of chickenpox. We have measles, mumps, rubella. So people are very well versed with vaccines in today's day and age. And we have seen them really halt infectious disease morbidity as well as deaths from infectious diseases, a tremendous benefit to mankind. So most people understand that getting a vaccine for COVID would probably a very good thing at this point. And I think most people have a question as to why does it take so long, or what is the process by which the vaccine will actually become available at some point.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sathe. I think our community is really eager to understand about clinical trials. Can you elaborate and explain further what is the process of clinical trial? How many steps are involved, and how long does it take for this clinical trial to actually complete?
So even before a clinical trial can be done, because invariably the word clinical means that it is being tested in humans. So even before a clinical trial, there is a very long phase of preclinical trials, which is usually the phase of animal studies. And there are a whole lot of regulations regarding what kind of studies need to be done in animals, what needs to be shown in animals regarding safety, regarding the toxic effects of drugs. And also there are animal models that kind of mimic the human disease, and whether those drugs actually worked in those animals for treating those diseases. And when all of that information is ready, when the investigator or a pharmaceutical company feels that they have met all the regulations for the animal studies, then they make an application to the FDA in case of United States, but similar authorities in other countries and continents, that we are ready. These are our prior studies. We are ready for a clinical trial, and they'll approach the FDA. Now, once that is done and approved, saying that this is enough, then the clinical studies can actually begin. There are 4 phases of a clinical trial. Again, the whole emphasis during the entire clinical trial is on patient safety. There has to be absolutely every precaution taken to make sure that the patients are not harmed. And so the entire process is designed from the perspective of patient safety. There are some trials that have a phase 0, but we don't need to talk about them. We can start by saying that most trials have 4 phases, phase 1 through 4. And the first phase of the study, obviously called phase 1, is a healthy volunteer study. Now, of course, everything is not applicable to every kind of disease or every kind of situation. There may be some situations where phase 1 study may actually be done in patients, but more or less, the phase 1 studies are conducted in healthy volunteers. Now, the 4 most important things for the patients to understand is that this is research and the participation is voluntary. So once we have chosen the healthy volunteers, then for the phase 1 of the study, we just want to see what doses of drugs are being tolerated. So they're usually dose escalation. We start from the smallest possible dose, and then we keep increasing the dose, and then record the side effects of the drug, record lab values if they are changing, and there's a whole protocol for it. Now, once we have made sure that healthy volunteers can tolerate the drug, healthy volunteers there is no lab abnormalities coming from it, we can proceed to phase 2. Now, these are healthy volunteers, so we usually cannot see efficacy because they don't generally have the disease. But in cases of rare disease or say cancer, sometimes even phase 1 can be done in patients, in participants who actually have the illness and not necessarily healthy volunteers. Now, once we have gone that phase, so this phase is usually very short. It can be conducted in weeks to months because recruiting healthy volunteers may not be that difficult. The drug doesn't have to be given for a long time. You can give the drug for a few weeks and see what happens. And if all is okay, again, each time there is a check, the results are checked, it is okayed by the FDA, then you go to the next step. Now, for phase 2, usually participants that are enrolled actually have the condition. They are actually suffering from the illness. But again, this is still a smaller study. There won't be more than, say, 50 to 100 participants, depending on what condition is being, analyzed. But again, it's a dose escalation. We started from a smaller dose and seeing if as we go higher with the dose, what happens. Mainly safety. We are still at the safety phase. But at this stage, we can also start looking at the efficacy because these participants have the illness, so we can start looking if the illness is getting better. Again, this could be a short study, maybe weeks to months. It's because we want some idea of the efficacy, we have to prolong the study a little longer and see how much effect we get, how long the effect lasts, and so on. Again, all these data are analyzed, made sure that participants are safe. At this point, usually the appropriate dose will be chosen for the study. And then that leads to the pivotal study or phase 3, which is usually the most important study in the drug development process. Sometimes they may have to do more than one pivotal studies. And now this study is the largest study. Now, depending on the illness, so for a rare disease, a pivotal study may just have a few 50 or 100 participants, depending on how rare the disease is. Whereas for a study like hypertension or, say, cardiology studies or stroke studies, as you must know, may have 3,000 participants. So depending on how common the condition is, what drug is being used and what needs to be established with this study, the number of participants can vary. In this trial, again, before the trial is begun, the sponsor, the pharmaceutical company, the investigator, whoever is conducting this trial has to make a design. They have to decide what kind of patient. So within an illness, so even if we take an example of hypertension, then who are the participants that they would like to study? What would be the range of high blood pressure that they would like to study? How old should the participants be? Can they have other medical conditions, or do they not want to have other medical conditions? So all of these design ideas are decided by the sponsor or the investigator, and then the FDA reviews them. The FDA has to approve them because you don't want the study to be skewed in any manner. And then once the FDA has approved the design, sponsor or the investigator also has to say, what will change with my therapy? So in case of hypertension, they have to say that the blood pressure will be lowered by these many points. This is something that the sponsor suggests. The FDA has to accept it, but it is not something that the FDA suggests. It is something that the sponsor suggests based on what is acceptable in medical practice. Once that is done, once that is accepted, then the phase 3 trial will begin. Now you can imagine, because there are a large number of patients, the phase 3 trials are usually done at multiple sites, sometimes in multiple countries, multiple continents. And even the recruitment can take a while. Now, depending on what is being studied. For example, if it is hypertension, yes, you can recruit participants very easily. But as you know, if you're like for your studies, if it is a stroke study, then you have to recruit patients who are actually having a stroke now. That can take a while, right? Again, you cannot recruit all patients. There may be age limitations. There may be other limitations depending on what other conditions the patient have. Sometimes there may be time limitations. You can only do patients who are within 3 hours of symptoms. So depending on how complex the study is, it can really take a long time to recruit. And then the duration for treatment has to be long, because we have to show that the drug is efficacious and that it lasts. It's not something that works for 2 days and then goes away. But for example, if you're doing an antibiotic study, you can imagine it will be a very short duration, because you're only showing that you're treating a UTI or you're treating a pneumonia, and that may be a short duration study. So entirely dependent on what condition is being studied, the duration of the study will differ. Now, this is the largest study. Once that's conducted, what that's done, for some studies, it may really be years, not even months. All the data is again analyzed and then again presented to the FDA. And if the FDA approves and says, okay, we accept that based on this population and based on this study and based on this statistical analysis, it appears that your drug is working. Now, during the study, either you have to compare it with something. It is not an open label, meaning you're not just using one thing. If there is no prior treatment available, then the usual comparison is with placebo. meaning the one group gets no drug, or they just get a simulation that they're getting the medicine or the drug, and the other group gets the drug. If a prior treatment is available, usually it would not be considered ethical not to treat a group of people when the treatment is available. So if a treatment is available, then usually the comparator arm is the available treatment, and it is being compared against the new treatment that is coming to the market.
Thank you, Dr. Sathe, for explaining phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, which are before the medicine actually comes in the market, the device. And phase 4 is actually just continuing to monitor that is it still working the same way that we found during the clinical trial. And if you can just elaborate a little bit more on patient safety. You talked about that everything that we do, randomization or double blinding, if you can elaborate on one, patient safety, and second, in the same note, I would say a lot of community members who are listening and those who are not actually from a medical profession, sometimes they have a question about why placebo study, why do we need to have placebo? So if you can explain those two parts, that will really help our viewers to understand what does entail into clinical trial when we are looking at the safety, that is risk versus benefit, as well as when we are looking at the placebo.
So for the first part of safety, so there are multiple steps put in the whole process to make sure that patient safety is of paramount importance. Like we discussed before, initially the entire protocol is reviewed by the FDA. They review not only for making sure that the design is sound, that it is actually in line with the condition, it actually addresses the condition that the sponsor wants to address, and that the patient safety, the dose escalation, continue the phase 1 to make sure there is no side effects, so on. So all of that is already inbuilt in the process. In addition to that, there are a number of safeguards. So, for example, each study is reviewed by an institutional review board. So in addition to the pharmaceutical and the FDA, when suppose a study is brought to a hospital and the pharmaceutical company says, could you be a part of this study? Then the hospital or the institution review board reviews the study. The institutional review board usually has 5 members. Of course, there are scientists and other researchers, but there is an insistence that the institutional review board must also have people from general population who don't have a science background or are not necessarily doctors. They review, they have questions. If they feel that a particular study is not appropriate for the patient, they may just refuse to accept the study in that institution. And the researcher or the sponsor has to answer every question that comes up from the IRB. Many a times, changes will be made to how much of blood is drawn, how many days the patient is observed, and those kind of things, just based on what an institutional review board says. In addition to that, the researcher, investigator, sponsor, they also have to set up a separate data safety monitoring board. It is usually called DSMB. It may have slightly variation in the names, but this board is an independent body. It is not connected to the sponsor. It is not connected to the researcher or to the patient. All they get is they get data from the study, and they continuously review it. Now, depending on the study, the review may be monthly, quarterly. It all depends on the study. But they continuously review data. They have to be experts in the field. They have to be experts in clinical trials, and they give an independent review. And right in the charter of the study, in the beginning, they have to say what will be the time points if the study has to be stopped. What will be the time points at which the review board will ask more questions. Sometimes they can even review the data and say, this study is not going well at all. We don't see any difference between the groups. We think you should stop the study. That can also happen. Sometimes it can also happen that they're saying, oh my God, the drug is so good that there is so much difference that even though your trial has not reached its completion, we are already seeing that the patients are benefiting a lot. And therefore, let's terminate the trial early and go for approval. So both of those things can happen. So these are all the safeguards in place. Now, in addition to that, the most important thing that came really after the Belmont Commission in '79 is that the informed consent procedure for the patient was set in. So now, for every clinical trial, there has to be a complete informed consent. It has certain elements. First of all, the patient must understand that this is research, and it makes very clear that the relationship as a patient and a doctor is different from a researcher and a participant. So we do not call individuals who come to a clinical trial as patients. We call them as participants because we really do not have that relationship with them as a patient. And so there's slight difference. Of course, you always do the right thing by the participant or the patient. That never changes. But the relationship is slightly different. The participant must understand that the research, it is entirely a research. So it is not that the investigator already knows. If the investigator already knew, it will no longer be research. So the investigator also has questions
True.
and they're trying to look into something. So that's the first thing. Second thing, that their participation is entirely voluntary. They can drop out of the participation anytime. It has to be their own free will. Just because they dropped out on the study, they cannot have any negative effect. So that's all built in the consent. And there is a lot of safeguards regarding data confidentiality, who shares the data, who gets the data, and how the data will be coded so that no individual identification is released at any time.
So, Dr. Sathe, here comes the most important question, because there is so much ambiguity and confusion about clinical trials in general population. What would you advise community member? Why clinical trials are important and why they need to participate in a clinical trial if they can?
Well, clinical trials are more or less the only way by which a new treatment can come into the market. And I think the most fear is that it's an experimental drug. Nobody knows about the drug, and we don't want to take that risk. But that is not entirely true. As we discussed, a lot of work has gone in it. A number of animal models have been studied. A lot of work has gone into healthy volunteer study. A lot of work has gone into phase 2. And so a lot of information is available about the drug. Not to undermine, yes, it is still research, no question about that. But it is not entirely unknown territory. The most important part, I think, about clinical trials is that because it is so structured and because it is so rigorous, the patient attention is usually higher than in clinical practice. Because a number of tests have to be done at regular intervals, a number of questionnaires have to be filled at regular intervals. So the nurses and doctors are constantly paying attention to meeting all these time points. And so everything is done in a very, very timely manner. New things may be found out about the patient, about the participant, or about community at large. You're really contributing to science because something that wouldn't have been known just because we studied few patients as one site. Suddenly there'll be a big medical information available because multiple patients are being studied at multiple sites across the world. A number of times this has happened. It has contributed to medical science in a very large way. And so for those reasons, I think that I would encourage patients to participate in clinical trials. A number of times, the reason that a sponsor or an investigator is trying to bring a new drug to the market is that there is some kind of an unmet need. If the treatment was perfect with the first one, there would be no reason to bring a second one. And so something has been identified that could help the patients more. And so it is an opportunity for the patients to access that availability of maybe a better device or a better drug before it becomes available to everybody else. And so that depending on the patient's need, sometimes it may be really necessary for the patient to participate in clinical trial and see, for example, there might be a person in whom other drugs have really not done their best. And this may be their opportunity to see if a new drug works for them. So there are multiple reasons, but overall, participation in clinical trials usually has better outcomes. And so that's the reason.
So if someone is thinking of participating in clinical trial, what is the best way to find out if there is something is available for them? Can they ask their primary doctor, or is there a website they can go and look that let me see if can I participate in this trial?
So yeah, of course, you can always ask your doctor if there is something exciting in the field, if there is something very new in the field. Most doctors are aware of it. They have heard it at a conference. They have seen it at some meeting. There may be an article coming out about it. And so most doctors will be available, will be aware of a upcoming therapy. There is a clinicaltrials.gov is the main website. Every study, whether it is a clinical trial, whether it is an observational study, whether it is a questionnaire study, doesn't matter what kind of study it is. If it is a study that is being done in human beings and is done in the United States, or even I think across the world, people register on clinicaltrials.gov, that study has to be posted on clinicaltrials.gov. So you can just search by the condition that you are interested in, for example, by asthma or diabetes or whichever way you want. And the study the website will usually tell the person visiting the website what kind of study it is, what drug is being studied, what phase this trial is. This phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and how, what are the recruiting sites, who can you contact. So you'll get all kinds of information. In fact, some previous trials may even have results on there. So you can see if the drug has been previously studied in a phase 2, they will give the results of phase 2. So you can read those results. If you can't interpret them, you can ask your physician to interpret them, and then see if you'll be eligible, or whether you would consider participating in phase 3. So clinicaltrials.gov is the most important website.
So, Dr. Sathe, this is the final question, but I believe that this is the most important question, and everyone is eager to know about COVID vaccine clinical trial. And the floor is yours.
Lot of research going on. I think there are over 100 researchers, institutions, companies interested in studying COVID. A lot of those studies are still in preclinical phases. Testing in animals and testing in labs and seeing if the product that they intend to use can actually be used in humans. But I think over 20 of those, maybe 20 to 25 of them are in phase 1 studies at least. Now, and then I think 4 of them are in phase 4. 4 of them phase 3 studies. So different ways of making the vaccine. I'm no expert on vaccine production, just giving an overview here. There are different ways in which corona vaccine is tried to be developed. One of them is giving the patient the genetic code for the vaccine. Either just providing the genetic code so that in the patient's body, the genetic code will correspond to a protein, and then the body will look at the protein and say, this is not my protein, this is foreign protein, make antibodies, which is what we want. So either the genetic code is just passed on, or it is passed through a virus. So basically there are genetic vaccines where the code is being passed on for our body to for the protein to be made by the genetic code in our body, in our cells, and then for our cells to recognize that this is a foreign protein and then make the antibodies, because that's what we want. The purpose of the vaccine is that we make antibodies. We make fighter proteins that will stop the virus when we see it. And for that, we are actually giving some recognition or some part of the virus to the body beforehand so that we are ready in case we get the infection. That's the whole premise of vaccine development. Then the other part is just give the protein. So the protein are added on to some adjuvants and presented to the body in the form of injection. Again, the cells in the body will see the protein. They will recognize that this is not my protein or our protein, and they'll go and fight it. And the third way is the old-fashioned way, where you give the inactivated virus. So a number of vaccines that we get in our childhood are either dead viruses or attenuated, meaning viruses who have lost their ability to cause infection, but it is actually giving you a virus, and then the body will react as though there is a viral infection. Now, there are at least four today who are in their phase 3. Now, being that the whole world is supposed to get vaccinated with this, the number of patients required for the studies are thousands, like 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 patients. So it's a very large studies. But what is in our favor is the studies are also relatively short, because they will give the vaccine product and they'll check the patient in maybe 2 weeks and 4 weeks and 6 weeks at the most, I suppose, to see whether the antibody is being made. If the antibody is being made, then we can say the vaccine has done its job. There may be some other studies where they might want to see that you give vaccine to a group of people and other person gets placebo, as in other studies, and then compare the people who got the vaccine, how many of them got the infection, and people who didn't get the vaccine, how many of them got the infection. So depending on those kind of things, the phase 3 design will change. But what we are hearing mostly now is phase 1 and 2 were done, and that the patients or the participants had antibody response. So that is their signal to go into a phase 3 study, showing that antibodies can be made to the vaccine product that is being given to the patient. And so even though it's a very painstaking and slow process, we have to bear through it because we want a vaccine that really works.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you, because we all are very impatient. We just want this magic vaccine to come very quickly, so that we can take care of ourselves amidst COVID crisis or COVID pandemic. And coming from you as a clinical trial expert, the community really will have a great understanding of why we need to wait and what is the benefit of waiting. Because rushing through this process is not going to bring us the greatest benefit, as we can see that every clinical trial has to go through a rigorous process. And there is a reason that this trial has to have stage 1, phase 1, 2, and 3. So I think that's an important message that our community members or viewers can take it from here.
Yes. Because in the end, if a drug comes to the market and does not have any efficacy, it is not able to cure or treat the disease that was intended for, then you can imagine that the whole exercise was really wasted. And especially in rare diseases, there is so much of unmet need. People are really waiting for a disease, and people are really waiting for a treatment. And sometimes that drives the impatience. But again, if it were not truly efficacious, what would be the point?
Yep. Yeah, I agree with you, Dr. Sathe. And I just want to throw the light. The last question is something which is really important, because we talk about clinical trials in medications, blood pressure medications, or say stroke medications, or pneumonia medications, and vaccines. But it's a whole new lobby of this works. And this, I'm talking about the nutraceuticals, right? All the vitamins. There is a whole range of vitamins. And sometimes there is a lot of buzz in the social media that this one works for this condition and this one is very efficacy for this condition. And there is a lot of discussion going on. What would you say about that whole industry where there are claims that this treats this one and this will treat this disease condition?
So you have to really look carefully what the claim is, because most of the time the nutraceutical or whatever the company is advertising the product, they will make it very clear that this is not FDA approved. So it was non-FDA, meaning that FDA had nothing to do with the drug. They could do a clinical trial. They might have done a clinical trial, but it was not reviewed by the FDA. So that's the one thing. And then I think they're very carefully worded. So people should pay attention to the kind of wording. So for example, if I see a memory medication, I'm a neurologist, so a lot of times even patients ask me, oh, this is a memory medication, I read it in advertisements, can I have it? So it's one thing to say that your memory will improve. Mm-hmm. And it's one thing to say that this is a cure for dementia. Uh-huh. You see, so everybody thinks that their memory is not good, or everybody thinks that they can do better if their memory improved.
Oh, so tell me about it.
A very different ball game than saying this is a treatment for dementia. And like I said, if it were not a double-blind, randomized control study, if it was just an open study, meaning I collected a whole bunch of people and I gave them a drug and said, oh, here is a drug for your memory improvement. Now, we've already put the idea in my head that it is a drug for memory improvement. And then I show a test by which the memory appears to be a little better. Then it is not a thoroughly, scrutinized study. It did not have the review that it should have had. And the claim is based on an open label study. So really it is worthwhile looking at what claim is being made based on what studies. And we see this all the time in skincare products. Oh, so many women responded by their dark circles were better, or things of that sort. So you really have to pay attention to what the claim is being made. It does not mean that, especially in case of skincare products, that they don't work or something. They just did not follow the rigorous double-blind placebo or comparator control randomized study design that was reviewed by a governing body. That's what it means.
Yeah.
And so, people can make their own decision if they want to put money in there or not. So it is very important to read the claim that is being made by that medication or
Yeah.
by that product.
Yeah. So the message I'm getting from you is, Dr. Sathe, that there may be claims that this medication is effective for this condition, but unless the clinical trial, which is the strongest level of evidence, double-blind and randomized, which will actually prove that yes, this works 100% or 70% or 80% compared to other claims, which may be just a general claim without any evidence-based study. So
Or without as strong an evidence, meaning it was an open label study, or it was a short-term study, or it was, depending on what patients they chose. Like I said, you could choose anybody from the population, and most people will agree, oh, I need better memory. That's not how we would choose participants for, say, a study that's intended for dementia. So it's a very different way of who was chosen, what drug was given, how long, where they blinded, was the investigator blinded. So it is not as rigorous. It doesn't mean that it was not a study. It just means that it probably was not as rigorous.
Yeah, and I would
the
just
execution of the study may be rigorous, so I don't want to take that away. They may have executed the study rigorously. Whether the study design was as rigorous, that's the question.
Thank you, Dr. Sathe. And I think your message says that if in doubt, talk to your doctor.
Yeah, always.
Because I think they are the best people to clear your confusion or doubt, and also give you advice that yes, I have been doing it because there is evidence, and or advise the patient in a correct manner. So we do have that support system. Never underestimate the power of the specialist who can advise you correctly.
Of course, yes.
Thank you, Dr. Sathe. I think this was a very interesting discussion. Our viewers have learned probably the best possible way to learn about the clinical trial. And I'm sure that they will use this episode to learn more about clinical trial, probably by visiting the website where there is more information. I appreciate your time and sharing your expertise with us on Healthline at TVAsia Telugu TV. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Varsha, for having me. This was a pleasure, and I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sathe.